We live in an era of unprecedented change, a surge of technological innovation. And sometimes I get overwhelmed, anxious, nervous, unsure about the future. How do you engage? How do you thoughtfully interact with all these things? I've always been interested in the history of exploration. I took a class in college and I learned about Western exploration of the world, things like Lewis and Clark moving westward across the United States, the discovery by Western Europeans of the interior of Africa, the exploration of outer space, the first manned missions to the moon, and even the circumnavigation of the world. These are all things that have always interested me, pursuing the next frontier. I read a book in that vein called The White Nile, and it was about the discovery by Western Europeans of the source of the Nile River. The Nile River has been the source, the cradle of fertilization since the beginning of human recorded history. As Western Europeans moved into Africa and started, taking over things, they had this desire to see where things came from. And so this book was fascinating because it didn't start with the history of exploration. It started with the people who lived there and always called those places home. When it was time to move into digital space, when I started kind of exploring crypto a little bit more, I used the name The White Nile because of that book. I read it. It was interesting to me, and I've always resonated and kind of found exploration interesting and exciting to me. And of course, the Nile River has two main tributaries. There's the Blue Nile and the White Nile. The White Nile is the longer of the two. It stretches through the Sahara and heads south, all the way south to the lake region, and comes out of Lake Victoria. The Blue Nile is shorter, but is responsible for 80% of the water. It floods, the silt, the seasonal surge comes out of the Blue Nile because it comes out of the rainforests. And so you have these two tributaries, and they come together and they form the single river. And you have the White Nile, which is 20% of the water, but is the consistent flow of water year round. And you have the Blue Nile, which is like 80% of the water, but it's seasonal. It comes in bursts, and it comes in floods. And, being a desert rat, always growing up in the desert, I've always been fascinated by water. So for me, it was natural. I read a book. It was about a river. It was about water. It was a good book. So yeah, I called myself the White Nile. Recently, I was at a tech conference. An old high school friend of mine, he brought me to go learn about cryptocurrency, Cardano, blockchain. And it was my first in-person event. I'd been circling this community for a few years, but I got to go. I got to meet people. I got to shake some hands, and I got to hear some stories about some really cool things. The sessions, the educational portion of the conference was about all these tech solutions, brand new innovations in how to get the blockchain faster and more throughput, how to increase governance participation, how to move these complicated real world decisions into the technological sphere, how to move them on chain. And these were incredibly interesting and engaging conversations. And I was so grateful to be there. But behind the scenes, right? My friend, he brought me to some closed door meetings, but late night sessions and strategy. And I began, as I heard people's stories and I was listening between the lines, I began to realize that what's interesting is that all the tech is moving forward and surging forward, but behind the scenes, it's all people, right? It was about, how do we move away from having a centralized figure be the guy calling the shots and be able to have the entire community make decisions for themselves? The groups and projects that were struggling, not necessarily with technological implementation, but they were struggling with human conflict. There's pride, ego. There's, misunderstanding, miscommunication. And as I began processing that and thinking about that conference in light of this, there's these two elements in technology. And I begin to see these things apply everywhere. Like AI is the same way. I was reading an article the other day about AI psychosis. Right? So there's this surge in technology, this surge in what these large language models can do and how they can interact. And they're passing the Turing test. People are thinking that they're interacting with human intelligence, even though it's artificial. But that artificial intelligence is lacking a soul. It's not human. It doesn't have human motives, human intentions, human desires. It's replicating what it's heard and making good, educated guesses about what the user wants to hear. And so this AI psychosis is essentially AI telling people with non-mainstream ideas that their ideas are great. And it's creating this cycle because we as humans are so used to, whether you're creationist or evolutionist, right? Whether it was patterned over millions of years of natural selection or if it was imprinted by a divine hand, humans exist in community and we rely upon human pieces. We rely upon each other's empathy. We rely upon each other's understanding, and we create trust networks because of how important relationship is and human relationship is. And so underneath the incredible breakthroughs in technology, there's this underlying current. There's this consistent, unchanging piece of who we are, and that's our human nature. And so as I was thinking about how to write about this and how to think about this, I came back and I already have the website White Nile because of that book. And I started thinking about the two Nile rivers, the two tributaries of the Nile, how the White Nile is steady and consistent, provides 20% of the water, but it is there year round. And you have the Blue Nile, which is this surge of floodwater and silt that just pours out of the rainforest during rainy season, but at seasons goes dry and leads to drought. And as I thought about those two parts, I saw a parallel. Technology is like the Blue Nile. It floods. It comes in surges. It comes in these incredibly innovative waves. And the White Nile, well, the White Nile is like our humanity, the core of who we are. And so you bring those things together and they're incredible and powerful, but where they come together, there's this confluence, there's this surge, there's this mixture. And so as I started thinking about talking about this and having these conversations, I really started resonating and these things started really connecting and these things started making sense in a way in this metaphor of the two rivers and where they come together forming the one thing really kind of just buzzed in my brain. And it became something that I wanted to start sharing with other people. Now, my name is Jeffrey Mashaw. I'm not a guru. I don't have all the answers. I'm not a tech expert. I'm not a journalist. I'm not an academic. I have spent my career kind of in my feet in two worlds. 20 years old, I had a job working with high school students at a church. I've worked with high school students. I've sung songs. I've done music, right? I've worked with whole church groups. I've done leadership. I've worked with college students and young adults. But my work, my vocations, have been primarily people, helping people live lives of purpose, helping them to maximize their potential, helping people to move past and move through and become who I believe they were created to be. And on the other hand, I've always been a techie. My dad brought home a computer when I was in middle school, and I've always loved computers. Computers are fascinating to me. I had to have a cell phone, a smartphone. When the cloud became huge, when Google started opening up all these cloud services, I'm like, I can't wait to do my calendar in the cloud and my email in the cloud and blockchain. Like this is cool stuff. And in tech circles, my question's always been, how can this make people's lives better? And in people circles, I've always been, hey, I think there's a tech solution that can help address this human problem. It's like, I don't quite fit in either one, like jack of all trades, master of none, a little bit of everything. And yet I haven't really quite found my fit. And so I began thinking about, how do I navigate this? I'm looking for a career that can kind of bring these things together. The part that really loves people and loves talking to people and loves engaging people and hearing people's stories and helping people achieve, what they were meant to achieve. And then at the other hand, I love technology. I love researching it and thinking about it and asking questions about it and seeing where it's going. But at the end of the day, I'm just a guy. And so my hope, my plan is to bring all of this together. And that is what the White Nile is. The White Nile podcast is my mission to help individual people live with purpose in this digital age. I've experienced anxiety. I'm wondering right now if I'm having a hard time finding a job because of AI, right? I'm curious about how blockchain and decentralization may improve my life in the future. I'm curious how advancements in medical research and genome editing is going to change my health for the better. And these are all things I've just got questions. I don't have answers. I've got questions. So my hope is to create an environment, create a community where we find the people with the answers, and together we ask them the questions. Not just what can tech do for us, but what is tech doing to us? And maybe that interests you. And if that's something that sounds like it might interest you, if you're interested in hearing about breakthroughs, but technological breakthroughs, but in light of how it impacts our humanity, and if you're interested in hearing interviews with experts and people who are working in tech, how what they're doing is making life better for all of us, please subscribe. I'm looking forward to getting to take this journey together with you. Thank you for listening.